Hi, we're in February, the month of love, the month of dates, and wedding proposals, and promises like, I will give you the moon and the stars. But all of these proposals will likely offer a vision for an appealing future together, abounding in good things. Today, as part of our Genesis of Greater Love series, we are talking about a proposal, a vision offered to one man on a great date. When God took him outside, showed him the stars, and said, Now imagine with me. And it went like this. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? God took him outside and said, Look up at the sky and count the stars, if you indeed can count them. Then God said to him, So shall your offspring be. Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. To this date, Abram comes with a pretty limited, narrow view of both his life and this God that had reached out to him several times already. What can you give me, he says to God. What can you give me since I remain childless? With this vision of the night sky, God seems to be making promises to Abram of what he could do for him. On the surface, the promises God gives are twofold. I can give you children, and he says elsewhere, I can also give you lots of land. So our interpretation here might be as simple as this. God proposes to give Abram all that he wanted. But the scriptures gives us multiple indication that this would be an utterly erroneous interpretation. This vision of the night sky and the promises of God that come with it offer a transformational and not a purely transactional relationship. The vision offered to him by God was so compelling that Abram was in, and not for what he could get out of it. How do we know that Abram understood what was on offer here when he raised his head and looked up? By God's response. God counted, we are told, the disposition of Abram's heart towards righteousness, a tremendously significant phrase used here for the very first time. How do we know that all that Abram believed here wasn't merely, yay, I get what I want, an offspring? Here comes in handy one of the most trusted principles of biblical interpretation. Scripture interprets scriptures. I marvel at how on earth does the author of Hebrews, thousands of years later, offer these incredible insights into the minds and hearts of the patriarchs who received these God's promises. It's the supernatural work of the Spirit for the sake of our understanding. From Hebrews, we learn that Abraham was among those who did not receive all the things promised. Instead, here comes another metaphor, another imagery from Hebrews. Abraham was looking forward to the city with foundations whose architect and builder is God. That night out with God, Abram caught a vision of a greater relationship, and he bought into it, and not for a quick delivery on all the things that immediately mattered to him. Again, how can we be sure of this? because soon after Abram was asked to give up the only thing that he did receive, his son Isaac. This story that has for decades infuriated me, and every time I read it or heard it preached, I'd scream inside, where is this boy's mother while this is happening? So incomprehensible, so difficult to reconcile with the character of God, but oh so incredibly illuminating of this moment, of the moment when Abram looked up and was given a vision of a greater relationship that produced greater faith. Abram, who had embraced the promises, I like this image of faith, embracing the promises, like gathering the promises in a big hug. Abram was about to sacrifice his one and only son. And now the highlight, the most incredible insight from Hebrews on this, on the quality and content of this faith Abram mastered looking up to the night sky. You need proof that the greater love drew Abram in for a relationship of a scope far beyond his immediate desires. Why did he take his son up the hill? Abram reasoned that God could even raise the dead. And so, in a matter of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from the dead. Post this date with God, Abram, one of the earliest patriarchs, the story has barely yet begun of God and humans. Abram, by faith, now somehow understands the resurrection, what God is able and willing to do for those he embraces in a relationship. Another scripture confirms it in James 2, and Abram was called a friend of God. When God took Abram and said, "Look up," this was the genesis of greater love. God asks Abram to use his imagination and imagine the best that this relationship could be, the entire potential of well-being that comes from it, including the mystery of the resurrection, the well-being that is the opposite of his current despair and focus on immediate desires and lack. Greater love of God inspires to look beyond the transactional value of relationships, a bigger picture, if you will. It broadens our narrow vision into a greater purpose. The vision, the imagery of the night sky invited him to look beyond himself. First look up and then far into the future, the impact that his relationship with God will have on others, on the world. Abram's "what can you give me?" is answered. A greater vision, a greater relationship, greater love. This was not the first time that God offered a vision to Abram, the first metaphor that God used to invite Abram into this greater relationship. Previously, in his conversations with him, God made promises through different imagery. Genesis 3, "I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted." And just before that, night sky, God shares with him two further metaphors that are clearly relational in nature. "I am your shield, your very great reward," says God to Abram. I'm not saying that these metaphors didn't work, but perhaps the night sky was the culmination of them. It just resonated with Abram. Why was this imagery of the stars so compelling to him? We can only guess at it. Was it a nomadic lifestyle that he had embarked on that made the image constant in his life, the only thing that was certain, the light of the stars? Was it something that had often inspired deep awe and wonder in him? I like how God takes the time to sell the vision with just the right metaphor. Perhaps not to sell, I don't like that expression. To propose, to paint, to present just the right image that hits home and births this extraordinary faith in Abram. Isn't even that attention to detail of imagery greater love? Thousands of years later, shepherds in the field will look up again, and the vision will lead them into the greatest relationship ever. I somehow don't think that's a coincidence. The greatest of all Abraham's descendants is born, and the star in the sky announces it. In fact, I think that biblical imagery is very purposeful, very deliberate. It's one of the best ways to communicate God's message and intent across cultures and across time periods. I'm amazed at how much effort the Spirit puts into tending to the continuity of these images for us in the Bible, in a beautiful literary sense, but also to deepen the meaning and solidify our faith.